Thursday, January 20th, it's the 5th class. I sometimes feel almost apologetic to discuss some of the softer issues of management, leadership, business, success, life, regarding culture, people, because let's face it, business is historically, we've learned it's about the bottom line. It's like sports. A few weeks ago, Antonio Brown, who's a wide receiver now, well, was a wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He took off his jersey. He literally quit on the play. And you saw older generations, like former Pittsburgh Steeler quarterback Terry Bradshaw, be like, man, this guy, I'm not quoting, I'm not even paraphrasing, but he was like, this guy's crazy, get a shrink out there. And then you saw his teammate, Tom Brady, who's he's 44, 43. He's a veteran, but he's younger than Terry Bradshaw, definitely from a different generation. He's like, look, you need to be sympathetic. And, if Antonio needs help, we got to help him out. It turned out that it was just he was injured and he was being forced to go on the field and he didn't want to. And the coach actually said, like, you're fired. So again, optics, perception, he's quitting on his teammates, but he would say a very different story. But the point is that this is becoming more and more commonplace. So football, very tough, very macho culture, all of a sudden, people's mental well-being, people's state of mind come into play. And so today, I would really say I'm going to kind of open up a little bit on like the secret sauce, the successes I've had, the failures I've had, the setbacks. It really boils down to people. The fact that I still work with the same the same other 4 co-founders, and we have so many employees that have been with us for a very long time, boil down to themes that we're going to discuss today. So we're going to talk about 2 P's: purpose, which includes vision, mission, and all that, and then people, which is human resources, culture. So if we go back, a little bit of a reminder. So we started off looking at the fiber of entrepreneurship, and then we looked at many entrepreneurs, and then last course we went a bit more meat and potatoes, talked about finance and accounting. And so today we're going to transition a little bit and talk about purpose, people, and culture. And next week, because Wednesday is like Bell's Let's Talk, I thought we would talk a little bit about mental wellness, mental toughness, resiliency, really what is going to separate winners in business and sports and everything else. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about pillar 3, which is purpose, and then transition very quickly to pillar 4, which is culture and HR. And so, when you hear vision, mission, statement of purpose, is this just jargon, or is this really like a beacon or North Star that allows you to make better decisions? So Jim Collins and Jerry Porras, when I was in business school, we were asked to read Built to Last, and I still reference it quite a bit. It's actually not a bad book. It's very well researched, and I still use concepts like BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. I always tell my team, look, I'm here to help you build clocks yourself instead of me just telling you the time. These are a lot of cliches, but very valid advice that stuck with me over the years. So Jim and Jerry really describe a well-constructed vision as 2 things. One is a core ideology, and second is an envisioned future. So core ideology is basically, what is the purpose of the organization? Why does it exist? And what do we stand for? And then envisioned future is kind of like a clear vision of what you want your organization to become, and what's the output? What is the major long-term result that you want to accomplish, right? And then once you kind of like have these pillars in place, you can actually start to run an operation. And this is important. I'll tell you why, because oftentimes a lot of entrepreneurs don't have this discussion with their co-founders. They don't go sit on a mountaintop and reflect and meditate on what they want their purpose and journey to be all for. And then after the fact, you got to kind of go and retell history and come up with vision and mission, but it's hard because that wasn't actually the way you executed. And then that breeds cynicism amongst your team. So you have to be careful. You actually do have to think about this stuff. So, this is taken from the source and I link to it, but I actually start with vision. So vision is like really more the thing that never changes. I call it the why, whereas mission is like the how. And then values are basically like how you more or less make decisions, your principles. And in theory, it's very easy to say these things. Acting on them is harder. And then the strategy is how you set forth, right? So to me, vision is, it describes the future position of the company. It's like a constant. It never changes. Ultimately, it's the why. And then mission, it's really the what and the how. And technically, that defines what your objectives are to approach and execute and achieve your vision. And that's why it should evolve and change, because the world changes, your business changes, your people change. And if you're a nascent company, very different than if you're a mature company, right? So for us, like Watch Mojo, I won't lie. I think if I had to do it all over again, I would probably say our vision maybe was actually like here to serve, if that makes sense. But that's also a bit too maybe abstract. So our vision was always inform and entertain, right? These were two cornerstones of my personality, which was I liked educational, informative content, but I was really also always believed in entertaining. Johnny Carson, who maybe some of you don't even know, but Johnny Carson was a very popular late night show host before Jay Leno, before Jimmy Fallon and all that. And he used to say Americans like to be entertained more than they like to be informed. And by the way, that is the quote I used in January 2006 on Twitter to say, Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the US. He's going to win the Republican race. And it was because of that. It was Americans do like to be entertained. They don't have time to sometimes take the time to educate themselves, for better or worse. And then the mission really evolved. You know, when I started off, I had a chip on my shoulder, as you could tell. I had a lot to prove then. And it was just watch, right? And it was a double entendre because, well, watch videos and obviously just do it, Nike's tagline, and just watch. I was like, just watch. I'll show you guys what I'm going to set out to build, right? And then over time, very quickly, I said, okay, well, just watch is like, you know, you sound a bit too insecure, and we're all driven by insecurity. So it became with a video on every topic, because that explained what we were doing. We were going to recreate the knowledge and information out there with a video on every topic, whether it was a cooking recipe, whether it was a travel destination review, whether it was a biography of a historical figure, or a profile of an organization. And then at some point when I said, okay, we've kind of covered maybe not every topic, but we've covered quite a lot of topics, we started to really find our voice, our calling, and our purpose. And we were covering the people, places, and things that people cared about, right? And it was great. And it was much pride that, like, I remember vividly, like 13 years ago, Martin Luther King Day, Yahoo featured our biography of Martin Luther King on their main page. 3 days later, Microsoft had one of our like lifestyle videos, like a style fashion tip on their main page. And then AOL had like a cooking recipe in time for the Super Bowl, right? So we were a bit everywhere. It felt great, but obviously we weren't still a business. And then over time, as I alluded to before, the big four bets, focusing on entertainment, pop culture, picking the top 10 format, really betting the farm on YouTube, and embracing fair use and showing clips, not just because it made for better videos, but inherently I felt, look, this is maybe my calling, leaving Iran, a country where a lot of essential liberties compared to the Western world were not fait accompli. I wanted to kind of build on the freedom of press, freedom of the media, freedom of expression, and fair use is absolutely a part of that. And I realized, okay, we're basically, admittedly, we're not here maybe curing polio, we are serving fans of fandom and franchises. And it was kind of an easy way to signal to new employees what we did. And then my statement of purpose, really, I do think it's here to serve, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And while much of it does seem like semantics, I assure you, you have to spend a lot of time thinking about this. Why? Because each day, every day, when you're not in meetings, when you're not necessarily on a sales pitch, when you're not in an HR session, your employees will use all of this as their North Star. I'm very lucky, or I decided to keep a relatively small business because I didn't want the Me Too issues. I didn't want the transgressions. I definitely wasn't going to build the biggest company in the world. I wanted to build the most admired media company in the world. And that for me meant keeping it small. And I made my bet, and I'm more than comfortable with that. But I'm still not in every meeting, and I have to set an example, and I'm not perfect. We all have our flaws, but I have to set an example and make sure that when I'm not in the room, the same way that you're not in the room, your team follows through and treats people the way you want to be treated, and the way you want to treat people. You want that to carry like a pebble in the water. You want that to carry throughout, not just at a given moment across the organization, but over time. So I'm not going to dwell much more time on vision mission. We don't need to spend an hour on it, but you do need to kind of become familiar with these things. It's very easy. Vision, constant, why, mission, what, how, it evolves. It's a very simple framework. And let's talk today a little bit about people and culture, organizational behavior, which was a class I really liked when I was in class. And this basically is all about recruiting and hiring. And nowadays, I know a fellow student asked, like, why is it harder to recruit people? Oh, I'm going to answer that for you. Managing egos, managing your own ego, managing your team's egos, alignment, culture is good and bad. And we're going to talk about a few examples. So you guys know me. I spent a little bit of time on Twitter and I came across this and I was like, eureka, this is perfect. What drives stock returns? Not saying stock returns are paramount, but it's incidentally, it does capture the success of an organization. One day it's true, it's computer algorithms. If something is oversold, buy it. If something is overbought, dump it. Over a quarter, it's true, it's analyst ratings. You know, if all of a sudden somebody comes out and says Peloton is a dog, boom, shareholders may dump the stock. If somebody comes out and says, hey, CrowdStrike makes a ton of sense, it becomes almost insurance against cybersecurity, everybody's going to have to buy it. Hey, let's go out there and buy the stock. Over time, it's changes in multiples, and you've seen this. A year ago, during the pandemic, a lot of SaaS cloud stocks, they commanded 30, 40 times multiples over their sales. Today, very different. Multiples are shrinking. So this is actually quite accurate. Over a long period, it's profit growth. iPod and the iPhone, probably the singular most pivotal product explaining the turnaround of a company, Apple. But it's not just the product, it's what it did to the bottom line. So profit growth. And then over time, it's return on capital. How well does a financial manager of a company allocate capital, and what does that do to the top and bottom line? But really, over a long continuum, it is people, it's culture. Again, 15 years ago, I take great pride in this, because 15 years ago, people rolled their eyes and were like, Ash, you're a hippie. But I used to talk about this stuff 15 years ago. And now when I see billionaires talking about it, it's not vindication. I'm just happy. I'm like, good, because it means it's a better society. Now, there's a little, we're going to talk about this. Some of them, it's just lip service. Some of them, maybe they're sincere about it. But over a very long period of time, the greatest businesses, the greatest organizations, they know how to treat people. They know how to deal with problems. And I always say, it's not if there's a problem, it's when there are problems, how do you deal with that? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker, a very famous management thinker, you probably have heard this quote. If you have not, it will come up. It's true. Strategy is fantastic, but if your people suck and your culture sucks, strategy, tactics don't really matter. Now, are leaders born or made? Warren Bennis was a very famous, respected professor at USC. That was a question he asked, and it boils down to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's nature versus nurture discussion. But today, I think that, and this is a quote from somebody I came across, and I support it, thumbs up. It is firmly my belief that almost anybody who wants to get a leadership role is misunderstanding what leadership means and should not be anywhere near a leadership role, end quote. This is very true. You could replace leadership with who wants to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people want to be the boss, want to be the decision maker, but don't understand that, yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. And it generally means you got to pass before you shoot. You got to give before you take. At most, as Goldman once coined, being long-term greedy. And you really, really have to constantly take your preferences, your personal objectives, shelve them for the greater good. And frankly, most people can't do that. However, doing the right thing is kind of easy, but it's a paradox that it's also really hard. But the 3 C's of culture, after decades of studying it and being in the trenches myself, it does boil down to candor, context, and compassion. Warren Buffett used to always say, I look for candor in management. Now, Warren Buffett doesn't care about people as much as profit, but it's true, though, that people who are intellectually lazy and intellectually dishonest are cancer to any organization. Context is really important. I talk a lot. I listen more, but I do talk a lot, I admit it. But part of that is because you gotta explain your decisions and put it into context. When I relay a message, the message is 20%. 80% is explaining the conditions and why we're doing something, because I've realized people internalize things. When I started my career, my CEO at Mama, Herman Tumurjoglu, one Monday morning when we had our management sessions, he just saw me and he was like, and I used to sit in on them. He saw me and he was like, "What are you doing here? I don't want you in this meeting." And I was like, "Oh my God, what did I do? Are they discussing me?" I was like a 21-year-old kid that was just doing PowerPoints and business plans. But I internalized it. Months later, I was like, "Oh my God, when is it going to happen? When are they going to fire me?" So once in a more social gathering, I said, "Look, Herman, I got to ask you, like, I haven't slept, I've lost weight, whatever, I was like, why didn't you want me in the meeting?" It's like, "Which meeting?" I go, "Remember a month ago, you saw me in the morning?" He's like, "I don't remember, but," he's like, "that reminds me of the day I wanted to yell at my executive team and you were young. I didn't want you to hear that. I didn't want you there. I was going to do some yelling." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." Then I was like breathing like, oh my God, because I didn't have the context of that little thing that was like tormenting me for a week. And then finally, compassion. You gotta put yourself in people's shoes. And frankly, most people are selfish. At 43, soon 44, I could say this. I meet so many selfish people around me. It's disgusting. But I realize it's human nature. And part of it, I'm super proud to be Western. It's Western civilization. It's a very, very me, me, me culture. And frankly, the people that you will be recruiting are very me, me, me. And entrepreneurs, the best, tend to be a little bit more long-term selfish. They're not near-term selfish because entrepreneurship is really all about sacrificing the near term for the future. And there should be a pattern here. If these are things that resonate with you, then maybe entrepreneurship is for you. But if you're like, "This guy's crazy, what is he talking about?" then you're not going to be as successful in entrepreneurship. Doesn't mean you won't be successful, but you won't be as successful in entrepreneurship as you could. And I've always liked psychology. When I was at Marianopolis, CEGEP is like what we have between high school and university here in Quebec. When I was in CEGEP, I took a couple of psychology classes. And as you can imagine with me, I was a self-appointed psychology guru. That's tongue in cheek. But when I wrote my first book, Course to Success, I kind of built it around these 4 principles. The principle of yin yang, which is balance and harmony. Too much of an extreme generally leads to unhealthy outcomes. Gestalt psychology, which is really the sum of the parts, which is my approach to when I build a team. Plato's principle of specialization and comparative advantage. And then Freud's division of mind theory, which balances ego with essence, effectively, the id, ego, superego. And frankly, Freud's theories had a definite parallel with Plato's 3 layers in a society. And this was what I was drawn to because mankind, we've been thinking about the same problems for centuries, if not millenniums. So if you want, you could check out the book. I will also upload these to my courses if you're interested. But psychology is going to matter. Now, of late, you might have heard about this theme of servant leadership. The late Tony Hsieh was the founder at Zappos. He was really famous for many things. After a training period, he would offer those who were offered a job to join the company formally a couple $1,000s if they wanted to just walk away. Those who accepted it, he felt it was a great investment because it would delay the inevitable. He ended up selling to Amazon for close to $1 billion. And he kind of adopted this flat management holacracy. I've never actually heard it out loud, but I've read a lot about it. He passed away last year. He was a very idealistic, very driven, very ambitious guy who, like many others, the flip side of ambition is addiction, right? If you're really driven to succeed, you're unfortunately very driven to succeed with substances as well. And so he took time off from Zappos. And I think that lack of balance between not having that purpose, what he was doing, he ultimately couldn't handle it. A bit of a tragic tale when you think about it. But he was kind of like the poster child for servant leadership. And so I think a cornerstone of servant leadership is not just being there for your team, but also having the intellectual honesty not to gaslight your team into thinking we are in the same boat. We're all in this together. One of my old bosses, who was flawed in many ways, had some very nice redeeming traits as well, he always used to tell me, "Ash, we're in this together. We're in the same boat." I was thinking, no, we're not. I'm going to row as fervently as you row. I'm going to block shots the way you're blocking shots, but we're not in the same boat. And you saying we're in the same boat is like you're peeing on my knees and you're telling me it's raining, right? So I've always avoided that. I always, even when I had a very hard time financially early on, I always recognized the privilege I had, and I had that perspective. So when I would talk to my team, I didn't want them to think that I was peeing on their leg and telling them that it was raining. But when you're building a winning team, you're literally just trying to get to a bigger goal that nobody alone can get to by themselves. Again, Gestalt psychology. So you got to either start small with baby steps, or you got to just set these building blocks so you could get to where you want to get. And that means ultimately, you got to manage your ego. So what does that mean here to serve? Do you like to be a waiter? And yes, it was one of my favorite jobs growing up. I was a waiter, right? And again, being in the service industry taught me a lot about how I wanted to be treated when I saw some clients being very rude. And then you kind of carry that forward, not just if you are a client later on in a restaurant, but when you have a team, because it's all about how you treat people. So as much as I say I'm Western, there is a reality that I think around the pandemic, maybe because we were all locked in, that I started to kind of ponder. And it's this concept of tarof, which if you are Iranian or if you know any Persian people, what is tarof? Tarof, I would say, is the secret to my leadership success. But ironically, it's also all of my headaches and heartbreaks and frustrations boil to this style, which is defined as a form of civility or art of etiquette that emphasizes both deference and social rank. Tarof is more than simply opening doors, giving up your chair, or sharing your meal with others. It's customary for people to seek gaining the upper hand. Parvini is an LA Times writer. I took this from an article I wrote. You could click and read more about it. She described this, and I had to read it a few times, and I had like, oh my God, mind blown. It's so true. She described the decorum as a form of self-deprecating, quote, self-lowering to get the lower hand. And that runs counter to everything you ever read in management in Western culture. And I'm going to get to that a bit more by what do I mean by that. But the goal ultimately is to be respectful. It's a combination of civility, deference, etiquette, empathy, sacrifice, even martyrdom, to the extent that one strives to eliminate others' pain and discomfort, even if it means somewhat masochist behavior. That's probably my line, not hers. So it's great to want to kind of show tremendous etiquette, but too much of a good thing is bad. And we'll come back to this, but it's really interesting. Oh no, I did not want to do that. Let's go here. Sorry, next slide. But if you're interested, I promise you to, you should check it out. I've told people who, to be nice, to be polite, oh, I couldn't have done this without you. They believe it. Maybe I was just being polite. When a leader says, I work for you, I say servant leadership, I work for you. I actually believe that because I do work for my employees. I got to make sure that I'm there to help them be successful. And that means giving them resources, giving them feedback, etc. But I don't literally work for them. So that one is more like it's a way of speaking to motivate, to be empathetic. But I would never then lie to them and say we're in the same boat type of thing. They're like, no, you're not. You're at all not in the same boat as I am. You don't know the struggles I have. And so it's balance. But I agree that Persians are way overboard. Again, if you're interested in this, read the article. The Iranians who read it are like, oh my God, this is so real. And I summarized a lot of others I've spoken to. I once had an employee at Christmas party sitting next to me, and I had no idea how well or poorly they were doing, but I was like, oh, it's great. Everybody's so happy you're here. You're a rock star. You have so much potential, and it's a Christmas party, so we're festive and all that. A few months later, my team is like, look, we have an issue. This individual is struggling, but in their mind, they're all stars. And I was like, oh my God, I turned red. I was like, then a ghost. I was like Homer. I went in the bushes. And I told my two managers, I go, I apologize. I was like, I have a problem. And I told them about this. I said, I've never told you about this dynamic in my upbringing. And I go, it's funny because I always joke, I'm as Canadian. What do I say? I won't say what I say actually, but my point is I go, I'm as Canadian as they come. I'm as Western as they come. Business-wise, I'm so aggressive sometimes and so driven that even Americans are like, whoa, let's calm down. Have you heard of tarof? Like, let's be more balanced, So, but at the core, my nature is tarof, and it's gotten me in trouble. And I assure you in the next class, I'm going to tell you 2-3 cases that I'm like, this got me in trouble because of tarof, where I said things and people took it out of context and they used it against me. And I had to learn. And a bit like a kid who touches the stove and hopefully they don't really harm themselves, I needed to do that. I needed to go through that. I needed to kind of learn, feel that pain to go, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So on that note, let's continue. But obviously I struck a nerve. And yeah, this is not limited to Iranians. It's not limited even, it's not even culture. There are people in North America who are like this. I don't want to generalize, but it's a big part of management. So what does people ahead of profit mean? What does that mean? Talk is cheap. I'm going to give you some anecdotal things, and I've repeated this many times, but it's proof is in the pudding. I didn't draw a salary for 5-6 years. But that's also my privilege. I had made a little bit of money before. Montreal's an affordable place. But my team understood that, okay, well, Ash is sacrificing for us to avoid layoffs. And then I even took a mortgage out in 2010 to avoid layoffs when our two competitors, Next New Networks and Revision 3, were basically folding their cards and selling to Discovery and Google, respectively. The second we earned a profit, I gave bonuses to the whole company, including writers, editors, whom historically even media companies view as second-class citizens. But I was like, you guys are the engine of the company. So that era, I think the people really were like, hey, Ash is a leader by example. My kind of naivete was people in later years will also see that. Whereas I kind of realized, well, they don't know, they don't care, and why should they? Even after we reinvested massively, and in the innovation segment later on in class, I'm going to talk about this. Even after we reinvested massively and our profits tumbled, a lot of companies are like, hey, we're going to lay people off because we want more profit. I said, no, it was on me. I decided to reinvest. It doesn't mean we're going to go out there and lay people off. So yada, yada, yada. That's a Seinfeld reference. Ultimately, caring about how people feel about your decisions and how they will react to those decisions is what people ahead of profit means, instead of just what is the impact of these decisions on the bottom line. And that's why, as a parenthesis, some of you may not want to be an entrepreneur right away. Some of you may want to be an intrapreneur and kind of show some entrepreneurship traits within a bigger organization. But a few of you will probably go work at organizations before you find your purpose and your calling. That's why, if and when possible, you should focus on the people you work for and with more than the job itself, definitely more than the title, because this quote makes a ton of sense. Great coaches are really great humanitarians. They really care for the athlete as people and athletes, as people first and athletes second. And this is paramount in gaining respect. And that applies in business as well. You have to care about people. I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years saying, look, some of you are probably struggling becoming parents, teachers, and employees all at once. We talk a lot about the progress that we've done to divide the gender gap between men and women, but I'm like, look, in the last 2 years, how much have we set back, female employees and contributors in the workforce who, probably stereotypes aside, have more parenting responsibilities than their male counterparts, right? So this is what frustrates me in business. There's a lot of great hashtags, there's a lot of great statements, but I just don't see it. The poster child of that is the GOP, the Republican Party. And by the way, there are some aspects of Republican thought that are great, and there's some that are less good, and same thing for the Democratic side. But the GOP was celebrating Martin Luther King on Monday, but Tuesday they go back to totally undermining equality for Black Americans. It's kind of shocking, right? But you see this hypocrisy in business as well, and it sucks. So stakeholder mindset, in the first chapter, the first page of my first book, Course to Success, I talk about Herb Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines. And it's funny, when I found this picture that I was like, oh, we're born on the same day. No, I'm not born in 1931, but I was born on March 12th. And I'm like, kind of interesting that we share that, employees, then clients, then shareholders. I personally put clients and employees as 1A and 1B, because without clients, you don't have employees. But I also agree with the mantra, the adage that if you want your clients to be treated well, treat your employees well, because an employee who's unhappy means they're going to be kind of, not purposely, but at least subconsciously, not as awesome to the clients as you'd like. So stakeholder mindset has been around for a while. And I think more and more people realize that capitalism it's more extreme capitalism's focus on profit harms people and the planet. And this is coming up more and more. Recently, BlackRock, who has more money than God, Larry Fink, says, you know what, stakeholder capitalism is not woke, it's not a fad. And he kind of says that, you have to kind of do more in terms of giving back to society and community to really be able to position yourself to have long-term returns that are durable. Now, as Larry Fink says this, there's a former BlackRock VP, who was on CNBC, bashing this and saying this is just marketing. It's not really true. Corporations inherently are not going to do the right thing. You do need governments to force them to do certain things. And, this is an ongoing debate. And I think I always go, if you're not part of the solution, you're the problem. That's why I've decided to be a bit more proactive about it. And I discuss all these themes, by the way, in the documentary I produced a couple of years ago when Anthony Scaramucci invited me to SALT, his conference. We looked at the growing role of entrepreneurship in society in addressing socioeconomic inequality, and also why young people are drawn to socialists, which again, like any other thinking, there's good parts of it and there's less good parts of it. And no, we don't need to get into a whole discussion on communism today. But so the tenets of talent, when you want to go out there and basically recruit people, absolutely true. The best ideas come from anywhere, especially at a company like WatchMojo, where we cover pop culture. Sometimes you want the kid who's watching an obscure show that goes on to be, hey, Squid Game, super popular. You have to have an open mind. To quote Steve Jobs, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. There are no sacred cows, right? Don't get emotionally attached to anything or anyone. I've built a business that when anybody leaves, in theory, the company uses that to get better. Why? Because I care about people. Sometimes somebody might have a bad habit or is weak in an area, and I don't have the heart to say, you suck at this. I build around it. It's a bit like if you tear your ACL, you got to build around the ACL, that ligament. You got to get better quads and better hamstrings so that you make up for it. It's a bit harsh, but it's balance. It means I'm not like blind to people's weakness. I compensate for that by surrounding them with others. But ultimately, when they leave, okay, I'm sad for a minute. If is there anything I could do to change your mind? But I understand it's not betrayal. I want you to be super happy. I want you to go do greater things, the way in some ways I left Ask Men and built WatchMojo, a greater thing in some levels. But you can't get attached to anyone because look, their journey is different than yours. Their objectives and dreams are different than yours. The worst thing a leader could do is be like, oh my God, totally show lack of awareness and be like, why are you leaving? Because they have their own life. They have their own dreams. This isn't North Korea, no disrespect to North Korea. It's a free society. People should be able to do stuff. But as a leader, as a coach, you do want to be set up in a way that you're developing talent always, you're looking at ways, you're building redundancies in your organization early on. Even though I didn't have two nickels to rub together, I always had redundancy. I had two people lead a given area because if God forbid somebody left, I didn't want like a house of cards. Ironically, when investors look at WatchMojo, on day one, they're like, well, do we have bus insurance? What if Ash gets hit by a bus? Like, don't worry. It's a sad day, I'm sure for a few minutes, people are going to shed a tear. But you'll see, I'm actually super expendable. There's a lot of other people in the company that are far more crucial in the operation, and that's by design. I don't have an ego. The last thing an entrepreneur does is build an organization that without them falls apart. That's not called entrepreneurship. That's called having a job. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Don't want to use crass language. No asshole rule. This is true. If you hire people who are, you know what, it does permeate through the organization. A lot of organizations talk about the stuck at the airport rule. Hey, if you're stuck with a fellow colleague for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours at an airport between flights, can you tolerate this person? Do you want to kill them? That's not good. So it's the same thing. When we hired early on a lot of young people, there was a gentleman who showed up, and by his own admission, he was a bit of a you know what, but I had to make a decision. And I said, he's pretty talented. He's going to almost be an insurance policy for my younger graduates, my younger recruits. But it got to a point where once my younger recruits had learned that they were like, this person is not necessarily a great impact on the culture. He obviously changed over time. And years later, he came back and he apologized to me. He goes, I was a bit of an a-hole. And I'm sorry that I kept undermining you and this and that. And I myself go like, look, I had to swallow my pride because it was a different era. I saw what you brought, but you also overextended your stay. And I was like, I'm just happy for you and your significant other and your kids that you recognize that the way you were wasn't good. So in theory, you don't want any a-holes on your team, but sometimes you have no choice, but it's not sustainable is what I'm getting at. Now, another mistake I've made is projecting, right? The people that you think are awesome, that are not going to let you down, that are not going to tell a lie, that are not going to, give you up, make you cry, desert you and hurt you, they generally do end up doing all those things or some of those things to you. So people don't share your values and principles, they certainly don't share your goals, and you have to actually set yourself up not to get disappointed. My moral compass, again, we all have weaknesses, we all have flaws, is very different than others. And I think early on, I kept getting disheartened when I would project that people were men and women of integrity and character. And eventually I realized, hey, I manage greed and fear, risk and return, wrath and patience, et cetera, in a certain way. And other people have different insecurities than I do. So I cannot expect them to make decisions the way I would make them, but it starts off with me assuming that they're going to behave and conduct themselves a certain way. Last year, I'm going to talk about this in mental well-being a bit more. Last year, somebody that for almost a decade I looked up to exposed themselves. They revealed their true colors. And I was so heartbroken, not just because of a romantic notion, but because for 10 years I kicked myself for not having kind of partnered with them on a project. And I said, maybe the company, myself, a lot of us would be in an even better position if we would have aligned ourselves with this individual. And I beat myself over it quite a bit because we do regret, we do look back. And in that moment, I was both extremely vindicated and happy, but tremendously sad and disappointed. But then I said, it's you. You assume this person was a great person. Clearly, they have their flaws because their insecurities are different and they manage the sins and virtues differently. And character is not a sometimes thing, right? Like Donald Trump, if he cheats on his taxes, if he cheats at golf, if he cheats suppliers, if he cheats on his spouse, well, he's going to cheat on you as well, one way or another. So when you interview somebody and the interviewee, the candidate, is bragging about how they screwed their former employer, yeah, maybe you take pause. If you're going to partner with somebody and everybody tell you they're shifty, they're dishonest, they cheated on this and they lied about that, well, you know what? It's your problem if you then decide to open up and partner with them. You have to be smart about these things. And it's great to have a savior complex that you give people the benefit of the doubt and you give people second chances and you're not going to listen to hearsay and whatnot. But you know what? If you're too idealistic, if you are too to the extreme, you only have yourself to blame. So you have to learn to balance all of these things. Character, it's true, it's how you treat people that can do nothing for you when nobody's watching. It's great for me to come here and say all these wonderful things, but you know what? How am I with my employees? And it's also how they feel about it. I sometimes have this problem where I go, I'm joking when I say this, like, oh, we're such good people. I think that's like a line from Seinfeld. When there was a gentleman from Pakistan who came over to New York and sets up a restaurant, and Jerry gives him some advice and he thinks he's doing a great thing for Babu. He doesn't. Babu ends up getting deported. So it's the same thing. It's great that you think you're good, but that's secondary. It's not even relevant. It's how do people think that you are with them. So integrity and reputation, this is what I've always wanted to do. I've wanted to build the most admired media company in the world, which is kind of like still kind of abstract because I understood very early that if you wanted to build the biggest company, you're going to have issues with culture. Hollywood is the environment that not only created, not only enabled, but they encouraged Harvey Weinstein, Scott Rudin, and many others, right? Bill Cosby. It was almost like a farm system to develop these a-holes, right? So I understood that I'm in media and entertainment, but if I want to be the biggest media and entertainment company, well, I have to become that. I was like, I don't want that. So I accepted the trade-off to remain somewhat small. This is Ted Prince. Ted Prince was introduced to me by an investor. Remember I said in the previous class, an investor might say, should you be CEO? So this happened to me. Ted Prince was Bo Peabody, founder of Tripod in like the late 2000s, approached me, or I approached him. He had written an article on Business Insider, and he was actually one of the few people that was investing in content. He's the guy that was like, I will invest in you if you go in style and beauty. And I was like, obviously, I understand why you think I should go in the style and beauty vertical, but I was like, I'm passionate about pop culture. He introduced me to Ted Prince, who was initially lawyer trained, AOL, Time Warner SVP, but he had just left the National Geographic for-profit arm as CEO. And I asked him, a lot of questions about fair use. I said, let's say you're the guy at National Geographic, you see Watch Mojo fair using some of your footage. Do you sue me? Do you partner with me? Are you mad? Do you want to break my kneecaps? Like, what do you think? And we opened up a lot. And he's one of the first people that kind of vetted my theories about fair use in a commercial environment. And he was like, no, I think you're onto something. He's like, most people don't want to take that risk, but he goes, it's a calculated risk. Go for it. And I was always indebted to him. So I actually the investor was like, if I invest, I want him to be the CEO. And I was like, fine, I can work with anybody. But I said, he's flying a 737. We're a Cessna. I said, let me work with him for 3 months, 6 months. And when the time is right, I'll gladly give him the keys and I'll take any role that makes sense. That's kind of the way you should look at it. Although now winds have changed. People generally want the founders to stay CEO. But this is something he said. I've alluded to finally doing a transaction with a private equity group, which I'll discuss. I haven't made any press, and you guys are getting a lot of insights that the world isn't getting, frankly. So when I did the transaction, he emailed me this. He goes, and this is like, I won't lie, we're all insecure about things. When I saw this, the part in blue, I was like, this is what I want my legacy to be. And this is what I want to show you guys, that you can do the right thing. You can be true to your word every step of the way. It's really easy to cheat and lie and cut corners and all of a sudden show intellectual dishonesty by saying, well, I know I said black, but I meant white or whatever. But when you keep your word, you are building so much goodwill with your team. It pays off in so many ways. And so we each strive to do certain things. I think, and I'm going to get to this later, the leaders of organizations are usually actually super flawed people because they sell themselves out to do the bidding of their investors. Whereas in my situation, I had no investors. If I was going to do the wrong thing, well, that meant I was basically deciding to do the wrong thing. I couldn't go and blame some other hidden secret arm that was forcing me into it. And so over the last decade, you've seen entrepreneurship grow. Richard Branson was a pioneer, Mark Cuban popularized it. But again, I always go for balance. You have all these different extreme points of view all of a sudden in society. And when I was launching, this is a slide from, when I was building the new brand ContextTV, Context is King website, where I was like, look, I think none of these people are absolutely holding any absolute truths. I think they all have an ingredient of success that resonates with me, but I would never want myself or future leaders to think anybody, including yours truly, is right 100% of the time. It takes balance. The world is really complex. And so you're balancing these three different components now, right? There was a time when people associated themselves with their work, but now it's a balance between life, work, and play. And so there's a lot of companies that try to do well, but they're all flawed as well. Patagonia, tremendous example. I will share this if you're not familiar with them. Chobani, another good example of, kind of stakeholder mindset. Netflix, super flawed organization, but you know what? They do try to do the right thing and whatnot. There's a lot of very famous recent incidences where they try to kind of emphasize people over process, and in many ways, their dream. And again, all companies, large and small, they then try to have these like key tenets: judgment, communication, curiosity, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes you do it after the fact, and it better be accurate of reality. Sometimes you do it before. But culture is ultimately an output and result of communication, right? The biggest communication problem is that we do not listen to understand. We listen to reply. Very true. George Bernard Shaw started off with that, saying the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, basically came up with this sentence that you probably have heard quite often, and it is absolutely true. Now, your intentions may be great, but the way people perceive them are generally very different. This happens to me 3 times a week. Why? Because perception is a function of your words, but mainly your actions and your thoughts. Sorry, perception is a function of your thoughts, but then how your words communicate those thoughts and your actions, well, then that alters your intention and it's perceived differently. And then don't forget about it. People's own bias and experiences are going to alter that as well. If somebody was screwed by their former boss and you say something, they're going to hold that against you, even though you had nothing to do with it. It's just a reality. And then nowadays, communication boils down to texts, email, et cetera, et cetera. Email is the greatest tool in the history of communication and the worst tool of communication. I spend a lot of times writing emails and I don't send them. I just save it as a draft. I read it the next day and I'm like, oh my God, why was I going to send this? Every mistake I've done boils down to being in a rush, so being impatient and not giving people context. So when you fire off an email, if you didn't read it a few times, sit on it, there's a good chance it's going to come back to backfire you. And when it comes to communication, there's force meets finesse, right? So we ended up having a video ready to go to celebrate Betty White's 100th birthday, which was which was going to be this past week. Now, tragically, on New Year's Eve, she passed away. So we had our video ready to go. It's New Year's Eve. There was no way we could get a video out, but we noticed that she passed away, and we said, we should definitely do a video. One of my colleagues said, we actually have one. So I rolled up my sleeves. It was the 31st. I didn't want to bother people to go in and do the work. I published it, leadership through example. People were like, hey, it's New Year's Eve. The boss is putting out the video and putting it out on social media and stuff. Now, my team then kind of saw that, and they all kind of rolled up their sleeves, and it was great. But that's not the point I'm making. I then had to sit down with one of my co-founders and say, look, I appreciate and recognize that we were lucky, but luck comes with preparation and experience. You got to create your own luck. But I'm like, we saw this video do 3 million views because we had the foresight to have it ready. But if we didn't have the video ready, are we agile enough to be able to get a video out like that? Now, that could come across extremely unappreciative. Like, what? We had this great hit. You're still not happy? Which I worked with a guy that was like that. But I had to kind of like appeal to people's insecurities and pride and, egos in a good way and say, look, we want to be known as, the pop culture folks. So I appreciate how this worked out. And I do believe that if it's not the 31st, we could get a video out. But I go, as much as it's great that we plan weeks ahead, and that's a fantastic thing, I go, how do we make sure that when news breaks, we're still agile, hungry, humble enough to still be out there and get videos out? Yesterday, or 2 days ago, or sometime this week, I don't even know what day it is or what month it is anymore in this pandemic, Microsoft announced that they bought Activision in the morning. At night, we published a video. I went to my team and said, whoa, hold on. What the hell happened here? Did we have this video? Did we actually do it during the day? Did we do this previously and we just updated it? I go, whichever one it is, it's super amazing, right? So you gather the troops, and it worked. That way of finessing, meaning you're challenging your team to step up to a challenge without coming across as an unappreciative SOB, is the difference between retaining your top people and making them feel like this bastard doesn't appreciate anything that I do. That's the difference between winning and missing out on the play. 3 things that cost you nothing but are priceless. I'm sorry, you're welcome, thank you. I could do this because I'm majority shareholder, I'm the CEO, I'm the founder. In America, talking about Tarof and the nuances, if you say I'm sorry too often, or even in just big corporations, I'm sure if you say this even at Reliance in India, maybe it's a sign of weakness. But generally speaking, you gain so much goodwill with these 3 things that don't cost a thing. Remember, we talked about what drives people. This is a slide I have. So this is Rishad Tobaccowala. So in his book, he talked about early on, and again, all these thinkers, we all think about the same things. And so at the same time I was doing this, he wrote this, and he's a very successful gentleman. And so he basically said, initially, when you're starting your career, you chase money, fame, or recognition, and power, autonomy. But he goes, in the long run, then you want purpose, growth, and connections, right? So you have to kind of understand that different people, given where they are in their careers, are going to want different things. At Facebook, and I've done this all my life, I don't actually have a lot of job listings. Yeah, as we get bigger, we create these job listings, but I'm always looking out for people. I speak to people, and then I go, what's their comparative advantage? What kind of organization and role would they succeed in? And what are they the Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Tiger Woods of? What are they better than anybody else? I'm going to put them in that position. Then we'll figure it out. Why? Because the mission will change. The vision is the same, but the mission will change. And that's why I've been able to have a pretty good track record of hiring people and retaining them. And also a note on that, oftentimes, actually, I'm going to talk about this in a couple slides. Now, things are changing, right? The CEOs who are the abusive type A folks, the alpha dogs and all that, I think society's tired of them. Why? Because employees don't need to put up with that anymore. Your personality is who you are. Your attitude is usually how a person treats you. Right? So I think empathy and all these things that we talk about are becoming more and more commonplace. And I think you guys, as the next generation of leaders, and also the next generation of the workforce, I think you come to expect it. You don't tolerate the nonsense before, same way that we don't tolerate a lot of stuff that led to Me Too, a lot of stuff that led to coaches being abusive and so on. Now, working for jerks is no longer accepted. It's a good thing. And it's a bit weird that we even need to write these articles because we just tolerated quite a lot of it. I spoke to New York Ad Week. This is a pretty good video where I talk about servant leadership, stakeholder management. It touches on a lot of stuff that we've discussed here, but it really talks about the paradigm shift where in 1999, Fortune named Jack Welch the manager of the century, but sorry, you've suffered enough. You don't need more of that. But basically, what we look for in our leaders has changed. Now, who said this? Gandhi, Buddha, Martin Luther King? Quote, when you think about the past, that's your ego. When you think about the future, that's your pride. When you think about the present, that's humility. It's an awesome line. It's an awesome line. It's by this gentleman, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Greek-born American, I'm assuming by now. He's been playing in North America for a while. Anyway, he's an NBA champion, MVP for the Milwaukee Bucks. Managing your ego, mastering your pride, embracing your humility. Awesome. It's a young man. He's a young man. And again, we always expect athletes to just play the ball. No, a lot of them have experiences. They're in these situations. It's good. And we all have egos. Some ego is necessary, but we're all driven by insecurities. Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. People are always, who's better? This guy's, no, they're both amazing. And they've had this superstar level of performance because they feed off one another. But they're both driven by insecurities. I'm half kidding, but I think Cristiano Ronaldo is driven by the insecurity that he wants to be known as better than Messi. Lionel Messi, he wants to be known as better than Maradona, the previous Argentinian soccer god, right? Who won a World Cup. And in some ways, Copa America notwithstanding, until Messi wins an international trophy, as Ronaldo did with the Euro, that's going to be haunting him. And just, we're all driven. These guys have superstar, seen as the greatest of all time, depending on who you ask, but we are all driven by insecurities. So balance when you're building a team. Some people are mercenaries, some people are missionaries. Executives and employees tend to be mercenaries, and that's fine. Founders, entrepreneurs tend to be more missionary-like. Management is the creation of rules, systems, and processes. Leadership is knowing when to break those rules. And again, this week, Martin Luther King Day, there was a time when the stuff he was saying, a lot of people did not agree with. Today, we have a day named after him. He was right, but at the time, a lot of those ideas were rejected. Didn't make them right. That was the system. Masochists and sadists. Entrepreneurs were masochists. Executives tend to be sadists. You got to be okay to fire people. You got to be able to cut costs. Things that generally inflict pain onto others. Pioneers and followers. Some people are good at seeing trends, being ahead of the curve. They may not commercialize them. They may not be synonymous with success in that field. Other people see an opportunity and they're just really good at mobilizing the troops. Alexander the Great was really respected by his soldiers, because he attacked from the front. Over time, he was crazy with ambition. He kept on going further and further east, and there was mutiny. His soldiers were tired. They wanted to go back. Are you a starter or are you a closer? I'm great at starting an idea. I then get bored in the middle, and I'm a great closer. So I've surrounded myself by an awesome team that can get the ball down the field, right? You're going to need both, and you're going to have to complement yourself. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Now, there's a lot of stereotypes about what that means, but generally speaking, you need balance. When the guys at AskMen hired me, they said, look, we need a guy like you who's a bit more talkative, who's a bit more out there, who could help us kind of get the word out on the company. So it was more that I was complimentary. It wasn't that they necessarily liked the fact that I was a big motor mouth, so to speak. Now, I've never really believed in hire slow, fire fast until I got burnt enough that I started to buy into it. The reality is mistakes are painful in the near term, but they compound over time. So if you bring somebody on part of your team and there's no fit, and after one or two kind of discussions it doesn't work, you're better off to just cut your losses sooner. And frankly, you should take your time to hire people because everything takes longer to take off anyway, so there's no rush. Again, I'm linking to all these articles. There's a lot of interesting opinions on why hire slow, fire fast is right, and there's a lot of takes on why it's not. It depends. The reality is case by case. Now, how do you manage millennials? How do you manage Generation Y, Generation Alpha? I always refer to Animal Farm. All employees are equal, but some are more equal than others. So this is a breakdown of how we define these subgroups. There's a good line by Colin Powell, which I had to read a few times. I didn't really understand it, but I'm getting what he says. He goes, you want to have your ego so close to you. You want to avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position fails, your ego goes with it. And at first I viewed this as your ego being only bad, but then I go, shoot, you need some ego. And I see this a lot with senior executives. They associate themselves with their job or with their employer, as well as material objects like their house, their car, their zip code, their watch. Now, I actually like that younger generations don't view like that. And I think there's this stereotype against younger generations, like, oh, they went through World War I, Great Depression, World War II, young people don't do anything. Well, that's not true. And we'll talk about that. But let me tell you the fundamental issue you're going to have when you come to hiring senior people, and you're going to face this if you want to raise investment. There's this cost value gap, and perspective is everything. Bob is a senior exec. He works at Acme. He quit. He's now looking for something new. He was making $500,000 a year in salary. And with club memberships, commissions, sales, bonuses, whatever, he was making $1 million. He's burnt out. He's looking for a new challenge. He's happy to charge you $10,000 a month, down from the 40 to 80 G's he was earning, which to him is a discount. You're lucky to be in his company. But you know you're not going to get 100% of his time, but you want him to give you 100% of his energy when he's focusing on your company. You, on the other hand, you've been paying your executive team an average of $7,500 a month. You're now paying Bob 33% more. And you know his experience is crucial, and you figure that even 10% of his time can drive 10, 25% more results than some of your younger executives. But he's coming at a premium. You're not aligned. 9 times out of 10, this will fail. You're going to have super high expectations of Bob. Bob is going to think you're just lucky to have him around. Paradox of compensation. Young talent wants you to compensate them for the future, for the possible contributions they may bring. And that's understandable. They're young. They're optimistic in their skills. They see things cost more, and they expect you to reward them for what they're going to bring you tomorrow. The veterans want you to compensate them for what they've done in the past. This super hard to balance, because eventually you bring the veterans, you want to show them that respect for what they've accomplished. You offer them a reasonable package, but there's a disconnect between your younger team. The worst kept secret is, and the best advice I could give you is 80% of the time, you're going to get 80% of the results and impact you expect from your senior executives if you just bring them on as advisors. You could give them some options, but before you bring on any advisors, ask yourself, who are they? What are they going to do? Where are they going to operate? How is it going to work out? And why are you bringing them on? So millennials, it's not so much that they're entitled. We always bash younger generations. It's just a reality. There's going to be this massive $10 trillion transfer of wealth, and they're well aware of that. The good part of younger generations is that they don't necessarily identify themselves with the work they've done, which is better than the older generation that views themselves just as a business card. However, the reality is, consciously or subconsciously, there's this massive transfer of wealth. And frankly, they're aware of that, right? There's less of a sense of hunger. There's less of a sense of urgency that their parents had, especially as grandma and grandpa are getting older. And finally, with the web and social media, the younger generation can kind of project what they want their profile to be, what they want people to think of them. And it's no longer about their job. Their job is secondary. It's about the Instagram picture, so to speak. And yes, that's a cliche. So whereas in the 50s through the 2000s, for better or worse, you projected how you wanted people to view you, your reputation based on your work. Today, between this massive wealth transfer and social media, you could kind of fake it till you make it, or at least fake it till grandma kicks the bucket, and then you inherit millions. Sad, but kind of true. And I'm not bashing them. And to that end, I interviewed Emma Vigeland when I was at SALT. She's a contributor with the Young Turks. And she talks about how this unfair descriptions that we have for the younger generation, who, if you think about it, went through 9/11, the 2007 economic meltdown, 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, where a lot of their friends, and obviously I'm talking more about the US here, student debt, and everything, this day of social reckoning with Black Lives Matters and Me Too. And we keep saying, oh, and don't forget student debt. And we keep saying the younger generation is weak. They're not. The younger generation generally has the right idea of where society is going, and you have to listen to them. But yes, there's also some nonsense that comes with it. All right, so we're almost done. The most important thing is why. Why are we doing this? Why are we hiring this person? Why are we even having this discussion? Why, damn it, why? And oftentimes I realize in meetings we're wasting time because we don't even know why we're having a conversation. Now, pride is a double-edged sword, right? Insecurities, hubris, pride. I never used to ask my employees, why don't you go out there and describe your experience on Glassdoor? I didn't think it was necessary. I never had a hard time recruiting. People used to literally kind of show up and beg us to hire them. We had a great retention overall. We had a great, dynamics of the company. But I realized if you don't ask your employees who are having a good experience to share their experiences, you create a vacuum where then understandably, it's just those, even if it's a minority, who are not necessarily as happy to go out there and fill that void. So for a period, We never had any reviews on Glassdoor, and I won't lie. There was a period where, like, when we hired like crazy, we went from 10 employees to 25, and then we went to 75 in a 2-year period. Not everybody survived. Not everybody got the training. Not everybody stepped up. And frankly, we would hire people, and sometimes they would see younger recruits come out, emerge, and lap them, and it would lead to some frustration. And by not asking those who are having a good experience to talk about it, you create a vacuum. And you do need to basically swallow your pride and make sure that you control the messaging, right? And so at the company, we always kind of do job satisfaction results, even though 10 is yes, 1 is not, even though historically people were happy, people look forward to going to work, people like their job, people recommended watch. I mean, that's 100%. It's a small sample, but we're not a big company. I mean, this is the department that's largely in Montreal. People like their experiences, people like where the company was positioned, people were comfortable giving feedback to their bosses, people were comfortable giving feedback to me, people were like, I always say my door is open, I want candid feedback. 95% believe that, which is good. Are we transparent? Even though the feedback historically was always very good, there was a period of time where we created this vacuum where we weren't proactive. And I learned another valuable lesson. And for you guys, it's to swallow your pride. It's, if you're unhappy about something, speak up. But if you're going to be the entrepreneur, you have to grab the bull by the horns. If you don't control your messaging, if you don't control your storytelling, what happens is you let others grab the pen, others grab the mic, and then it's hard to get things back, even though we have, and people seem to be happy. So ultimately, as you go through your journey, there's a lot of noise out there. It goes back to the why. So this is Rich Antonielli. He's the CEO of Complex. I would say he's one of my better friends, people I look up to in the industry. We both have 2 daughters, roughly the same age. And he asked a couple of years ago, this is 2019, how old were you when you figured it out? Meaning you stopped worrying about other people's perspectives and were honest with yourself about what you truly want and what you were willing to do to go get it. The only success that matters is if you achieve your goal. So Rich is a very smart guy. And so that's ultimately took me 15 years to realize. If you could go back to what I said, I'm not going to spend that much time on vision, mission. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff about building a successful team, but you're going to have to spend a lot of time asking yourself, what do you want this journey to be all about? And that's okay to change. Why? Because what you want as a 22-year-old should be different than what you want as a 40-year-old. There's a great Muhammad Ali line that the man who has the same point of view at 40 as he did at 20 wasted 20 years of his life. But you have to ask yourself, when you get on this journey, what you want out of life, and then go accordingly. The sooner you realize that, the sooner you avoid all the noise, the sooner you avoid all the heartbreaks and the headaches, and frankly, just baggage that you don't need, baggage that hurts you focus on what matters most.